shake on the world.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this exciting new episode of Les Incorrectibles. I'm truly delighted to have you with us tonight, and thank you once again for being so many, thanks to our wonderful subscribers without whom this show can exist. I'm thrilled to have you for a special episode this week, certainly given the recent news developments. I'm pleased to warmly welcome Eric Zemmour. Good evening, Eric Zemmour. Thank you for accepting this invitation, a bit last minute. And just a small aside, I thank you all the more because in the so-called national camp, there's a bit of reluctance to come to alternative media. You, from the very start, have always, a bit like Donald Trump, I wish you the same success and recognition.
Thank you.
Agreed to come and give a lot of credit to alternative media. Why?
Yes, because firstly, these are often media outlets that are closer intellectually and ideologically to my ideas and values. I was used to going on mainstream media, but most of them lean to the left, except obviously for the Bolloré Group's outlets, which have a different perspective. So I think it's good and necessary to support media that try to disrupt this leftist monopoly that exists in the mainstream. I did it when I was on CNews, and now I find it important to help alternative media that further chip away at this monopoly. It's crucial to stand by those who provide different viewpoints and challenge the status quo. I can't criticize this monopoly and not support those who actively work to undermine it. It would be contradictory to my beliefs and goals. By backing these alternative voices, I'm contributing to a broader spectrum of ideas being shared and discussed.
It's like, for example, that Marine Le Pen hasn't given a single major interview to alternative media like ours.
She does exactly what she wants, and I have no comment to make.
Okay. Well, anyway, we wanted to have you on this week because we're going to talk a lot about the most recent and dramatic news, starting with this case that has affected us all. I'm obviously thinking of the murder of young Elias. First, how did you react when you heard this news, Eric Zemmour?
You know, now there's a kind of tragic, horrible habit forming. It's as if a dark pattern is emerging. All these deaths pile up one after another, creating a haunting tally. Forgive me, don't think it's a lack of sensitivity, but I don't want to lament these poor kids' deaths as if it were the first time, as if I were surprised, as if I were saddened. Of course I'm saddened. My heart aches for every lost life, every future that will never be realized. It's just that the frequency has numbed me.
Does it still shock you, or is it becoming so common?
Actually, it's quite the opposite. Not only does it continue to shock me, but it shocks me even more profoundly each time, more than I could have ever anticipated. Let me explain this to you in detail. There was Lola, Thomas, Augustine, and now little Elias, and the list goes on, seemingly without end. How many more will there be? How many more? Why am I telling you all this? Because when it's just one case, you can say it's an isolated incident, an individual case, a madman, a sick person, or perhaps he had a particular reason, etc. You can perceive it as an individual story. But when there are so many, you understand, don't you? We absolutely need to make an effort to draw a collective, sociological, ideological, and therefore political lesson from these occurrences. When it's an individual case, it's just a news item, but when there are so many, it becomes a societal issue, a social fact, which is the very principle of sociology. It's like the famous phrase, you know, by Engels, who was Karl Marx's friend, who said that at a certain point, quantity becomes quality. If you want, look, I'll give you a very simple example to illustrate this concept clearly. After all, evil has always existed, violence has always existed in all civilizations, at all times, among all peoples throughout history. Obviously, there have always been crimes throughout human history. Since the dawn of humanity, people have tried to understand what was happening around them. At first they said, it's evil, it's the devil, you know. Then they said, man, it's original sin. You see, there are religious, metaphysical explanations. And then in the 19th century, they said it's poverty. So we must reduce misery and we'll reduce violence and so on. Victor Hugo famously said, open a school and you close a prison. We opened schools indeed, and yet here we are, still grappling with these issues, still facing these persistent challenges. In recent years, feminists have brought attention to a deeply concerning issue. They highlight that annually there are approximately 100 to 150 murders of women by men, specifically by their partners, husbands, lovers, and so forth. Feminists argue that because these incidents are not isolated, there must be a comprehensive explanation for this pattern of violence. They refer to this as femicide, suggesting that the aggression men exhibit towards women is not merely a series of individual cases, but rather a systemic issue rooted in societal structures and norms. This violence was once dismissed as a crime of passion, but feminists insist that the entire dynamic between men and women needs to be critically examined and fundamentally altered. Although I challenge this analysis, I do not prevent them from exploring it further, and I find the discussion it generates to be quite engaging. In my perspective, when we examine numerous cases such as those of Elias, Lola, Thomas, Augustine, and others, we are confronting a broader phenomenon that I term francocide. This signifies that these young individuals are targeted and killed because of their French identity. The perpetrators are predominantly individuals from Maghreb or African immigrant backgrounds, many of whom are of Muslim cultural heritage. Furthermore, their method of attack, typically involving knives, is indicative of certain cultural influences. It is alarming to note that there are approximately 120 knife attacks occurring daily in France. Reflecting on my childhood, such incidents were virtually non-existent. This shift signifies a demographic change and suggests that a segment of Maghreb or African youth is engaging in violence against their French peers. This, in my view, represents a conflict between two groups of youth, akin to an army attacking a perceived enemy. I am convinced that if we continue to view these incidents solely as isolated cases, attributing them to individual mental instability or radicalization, we fail to grasp the larger context. By doing so, we remain unable to effectively address and halt this phenomenon. I assert that this is a case of francocide, a clash of civilizations occurring on French soil, where one group perceives itself as waging a conquest against another. This extends beyond murder to include the rape of women, both young and elderly, mirroring the tactics of conquering forces throughout history. We can draw parallels to the Russian army in Germany during 1944 to 1945, among other historical instances. Interestingly, at that time, Russian forces claimed they were avenging the atrocities committed by Germans in 1941 to 1942, which was not entirely unjustifiable. In a similar vein, many young individuals from Maghreb today assert that they are avenging past colonization, a sentiment that is prevalent in contemporary discourse. This notion of vengeance is reminiscent of the ideas proposed by Frantz Fanon, a significant figure in the decolonization movement. Fanon, a Martinican psychiatrist and ally of the FLN, was a notable thinker and friend of Jean-Paul Sartre. He famously stated that the colonized is a persecuted who dreams of being a persecutor. I believe this observation is pertinent to the current situation. This situation is undeniably tragic, and the responsibility lies heavily on our political, media, and societal leaders. They have allowed the entry of individuals with unresolved grievances against us, some of whom perceive themselves as operating in enemy territory, engaging in what they view as a continuous jihad. I argue that this ongoing conflict manifests as a persistent jihad with assaults, rapes, and drug trafficking, representing a relentless battle against those they consider infidels.
For you, these murders are absolutely the symbol of a clash of civilizations.
Absolutely, exactly. It's a sign of a civilizational war on our land, a conflict deeply rooted in the very fabric of our society. We have two peoples, two civilizations that clearly cannot live together in harmony or peace. Some, like me and others, have said this for a long time, warning of the inevitable clashes. Our elites told us, No, no, we'll manage, we'll make the famous coexistence work, promising a harmonious blend of cultures. But two civilizations on the same soil, it's not possible. It's a challenge too great to overcome. So let's try to extend this story to delve deeper into its complexities and nuances. It doesn't mean that, of course, we should do what I hear everywhere now. It's becoming almost commonplace, a notion spreading rapidly that is to reform juvenile justice, meaning imprison minors like adults since they kill like adults, meaning how is it reasonable or justifiable to treat them differently?
How are young people willing to go to such incredible extremes?
So I'll finish outlining the measures, like mandatory minimum sentences and other related policies. You see, deporting foreigners, stripping foreign adults of citizenship, cutting social benefits to parents of minors, and implementing stricter immigration regulations are all part of the comprehensive plan.
Because these youths were known to the authorities.
But I know it well, as always. But we will think about that. But you ask me a very good question, so we will consider, if you agree, juvenile justice. 2, what you're telling me is why they are like that. I hear a lot, and I read a lot of analyses from psychologists and psychiatrists who are moved, or judges who are moved, by the lack of empathy shown by these young criminals towards their victims. You must have read that like me. You must have heard that as well. And everyone is surprised by this lack of empathy. But I'll tell you, it's normal. Why? Because it's a war. And in war, there's no empathy for the enemy. Besides, I continue and I get to juvenile justice. What exactly is juvenile justice? We know it's an ordinance from 1945 after the war, after the 2 world wars, which favors education over repression. Quite commendable. At the time they said we have young people. We must not lose them. We must recover them for society. It's important that all young French people are integrated, that there are no waste, so to speak, you see, for society. In truth, to judge over the long term this educational will, we can say that it's the culmination of what Norbert Elias, called the civilizing process. What exactly is the civilizing process? In short, from the 16th, 17th century, the kings will pacify the behavior of the nobility of the great feudal lords who were used to settling everything with a sword, the famous duels of D'Artagnan. Duels will be banned, and nobles will be put at court to become courtiers, and instead of wielding the sword, they will wield the epigram. And Norbert Elias explains very brilliantly that the nobility will do this in France with Louis XIV, obviously that the French bourgeoisie will imitate the nobility, that the French people will imitate the French bourgeoisie, and that all of Europe, all the European aristocracy will imitate the French aristocracy. Therefore, this civilizing process, that is to say, where everyone learns to control their passions, their impulses, their emotions, will become a European phenomenon. But what we often forget is that it is only European, and that, for example, in the Arab-Muslim civilization, a mode of regulating violence is maintained that is not this self-control process, you see, which is a process of fierce repression. So these two processes, when people do not mingle, pose no problem. Each has its own mode of regulating violence, you understand well, one by self-control, the other by fierce repression. But when representatives of both civilizations are put side by side on the same territory, what happens? Those who are used to fierce repression are first stunned by what they call the weakness of the European system, since the European system does not need to be fierce because it relies on the self-control of each individual, you understand. So these people spread in incredible violence, and they say that France, the authorities, are guilty of weakness. And I come back to my lack of empathy. Why would you want them to have empathy for sheep that let themselves be slaughtered? So these people have no empathy for their victims. They would have empathy for Islamic victims, for victims they consider as brothers. And you notice that, apart from drug trafficking cases, there is no aggression, you see. So we see that here we come to the end of this civilization war and this clash of civilization on our soil. And the victims are obviously the young people who are not protected by the state, since we have given up on an implacable repression system. So we must restore an implacable repression system that once existed to ensure that these young people, who are our future, are not lost to the chaos and violence that can erupt when systems clash without understanding. It is vital that we reevaluate our approaches to juvenile justice and perhaps integrate a balance of education and necessary discipline to protect society and the youth within it. Only by acknowledging these challenges and responding appropriately can we hope to prevent further erosion of empathy and the rise of unchecked violence. This is not just about punishment, but about creating a sustainable system where empathy can indeed flourish, even in the face of adversity.
So, if I understand you, before being a juvenile justice issue, it's first an ethnic origin problem of the attackers.
No, it's a problem. So let me clarify that. I told you it's a problem of two modes of civilization with two processes of handling violence that aren't the same and thus clash, and obviously the more violent one overpowers the one that learned self-control. First thing. I see it as the reflection of this clash of civilizations, this confrontation between two youth groups, two peoples that we witness every day, with little Elias being the latest victim before others. There was in the subway,
Here in line, exactly.
Here I am.
Assault following an unbelievable scuffle at
A real stab to
the neck.
Exactly, that's exactly what I'm saying. There are two ways to regulate and react, always with a knife involved somehow. Exactly, always with a knife, always. As if by chance, it's cultural in many Islamic countries, the knife fights. Well, let's continue. So, in my opinion, we must
Legislate.
The knife isn't really the main issue here, you see. We can't just go around banning knives. That would mean banning eating with knives altogether. You see what I mean? I mean, we're addressing the problem completely backwards.
Walking around with knives is different.
But you are absolutely right. They'll always find them. The problem is the impossible coexistence of these two civilizations and these two peoples.
So first of all, it's structural for you.
And yes, rather than discussing the two peoples separately. Obviously, this is structural, that's it. We can use that word confidently. Let's clarify the situation in these two peoples and in this clash of civilizations, which is denied by everyone, including the entire political class from Marine Le Pen to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and even Macron's camp. We must recognize this absolute refusal of this diagnosis, which, for me, ultimately prevents us from solving the issue effectively.
Solutions, yes.
So, the solutions. What would you propose? First, as I told you, none of this stops me from reforming juvenile justice, from sanctioning much more severely, and so on. But as for...
To go further penalize.
But yes, exactly. We must penalize. We must cut social benefits for families of delinquents. We must expel foreign adult delinquents, cut social benefits for minor delinquents, for so-called isolated minors, send them back home. Those without parents here seems basic, and furthermore, we must absolutely strip nationality from all foreign criminals or dual nationals. If you want dual nationality, it's common for all children of immigration today, because in Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, the constitutions of these countries state you never lose the nationality of those countries. So these young people are French nationals, but also Algerian, Moroccan, Tunisian, or African nationals. It's in their parents' country's constitution. So we must strip nationality from these people and send them back home. That's what I think we must do beyond that. Still, the people that...
You describe them as the countries that should be the ones to take in.
Accept?
Accept.
Then I know that argument. You see, but of course.
I've seen it. That Algerian influencer who was sent to Algeria and got sent back to us.
I feel like saying, just look at what Trump did with Colombia. That didn't even last for 2 whole entire hours, and it was honestly just a complete joke.
It was for Donald Trump since you were at his arrest. He's your model, at least in terms of immigration policy.
I wouldn't call him a model, nor would I say he is someone to emulate in every aspect. I've carefully considered, along with my team of experts and advisors, a comprehensive migration policy that seems fitting and appropriate for this dramatic and ongoing clash of civilizations that we are witnessing today. I see that Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, also has some decent solutions to offer in this complex area. When I hear, as I did when I was present in Washington, D.C. during his inauguration speech, that he says immigration is akin to an invasion and conquest, Yes, you're right. I find my words echo there, resonating with some of the ideas I have been contemplating. This implies many things, like what he did with Colombia and other countries in similar situations. So you
have a slight variation there. I focus more on immigration than Islam this time. In fact, he doesn't make a distinction. You get the impression, it's true, you hear many people, they keep saying you have an obsession with Islam. Do you make the distinction, or is it in France, Islam?
I make a distinction because we have had, and Trump also makes the distinction, but we have had, he himself is a child of immigration. I believe Irish, a mix of Irish and German immigration. So obviously I make a difference between European or even Asian immigration and Arabi Muslim immigration. Yes, it's not the same thing. I see that European immigration has assimilated very well, that Asian immigration has remarkably assimilated in a very short time, even though, you know, we are always told it's colonization. We colonize them, so they want, what I told you myself, they want to get revenge. I see that the children of Vietnamese or Cambodian immigration were also colonized by France, and that they do not have this constant resentment towards France. On the contrary, they assimilate very well. They have excellent school careers for the most part. They give their children French first names, and so on and so on. So I clearly see the difference, and I would add that even within Arab Muslim immigration, there are people like the Kabbals who, for a long time, have adopted certain rules of assimilation. For example, the most essential for me, which is religion is to the there. And on the other hand, there is obviously a whole youth, particularly the youth. There is a generational conflict within Arab Muslim immigration underground, a whole youth that we see it in surveys, we see it in their behavior, we see it in their reactions when they are interviewed, clearly want to return to a classic practice of Islam, that is to say, which imposes itself in the public space, which is fundamentally political in the sense of the city. You know, I have extensively quoted Renan, who said Islam is the indistinguishable union of the spiritual and the temporal. It's the reign of a dogma. It's the heaviest chains humanity has ever borne. This phrase I have often quoted, and he added, it's the opposite of Europe. It's fanaticism. So if you want, I do not pretend to want to change Islam. I understand very well that Islam is what it is. However, what I say to Muslims is that to live in France, they must change their practice of Islam and reduce it to a religion at home. I think all others should go to one of the 50 Muslim countries. But there are Muslims who have understood this, particularly in the generation of our fathers or grandfathers. And I see, moreover, that there is, as always in the history of France, in this people and in this war of conquest, there are French allies. You know, it's a tradition of French history. Every time France is attacked, there are French who side with the conqueror and the aggressor, from the 100 Years' War to the Second World War. At LFI, it's clear, and with all these satellites around, that is to say the media they support, that is to say the universities, that is to say all this environment. But manifestly, LFI and Jean-Luc Mélenchon themselves speak of New France. So he fully assumes it. Moreover, it is important to recognize that these distinctions and observations are not merely abstract or academic. They have real-world implications that affect how societies function and interact. The differences in assimilation and integration can influence social cohesion, economic progress, and political stability. In many cases, the success of immigrant communities in blending into their new environments can serve as a model for others. The ability of immigrant communities to adapt while maintaining their cultural heritage is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of human societies. It is crucial to encourage dialogue and understanding between diverse groups to foster a more harmonious coexistence. This is especially vital in a world that is increasingly interconnected, where the movements of people across borders are more common than ever before. As we navigate these complexities, we must strive to balance respect for cultural diversity with the need for social integration and harmony. In doing so, we can build a future that is inclusive, equitable, and prosperous for all.
And whose discourse has evolved, by the way.
Ah, yes, but that's been several years. If you want to go back to the antediluvian times, when Jean-Luc Mélenchon mocked the Islamic veil and said it was an act of self-stigmatization to complain about stigmatization, I know because he said it in front of me back when I was a commentator on On n'est pas couché. You see, that dates back a long time now. It's the years 2008, 2010. We are 15 years past that. And since then, he has evolved. But why has he evolved? Simply because demographics win. You know, I'll give you 2 or 3 numbers. You'll understand the issue. It's very simple. Today, we have 7 million immigrants, meaning people born abroad who are still foreigners. We have 8 million of whom some have become French. We have 8 million people whose parents, one of the parents, is foreign. That makes 15 million. That's over 20% of the French population. And today, in 2023, 30% of children born, do you hear me? 30% of children born in 2023 have a non-European parent, 30%. Eric Morillot. Understand what that means. It means that once the boomers, the people of the boomer generation, born in 44, 42, 45, 48, 50, you see, once all these people leave the stage because they create a kind of statistical illusion since they are so numerous. When these people leave the stage, we will find ourselves with a France where there will be 30% Muslims. The shift in demographics is significant and cannot be ignored. It is a transformation that affects every aspect of society, from education to politics to everyday life. The cultural landscape is changing and the implications are vast. This change is not just about numbers. It's about how identities are formed and how communities interact. It's about the future of a nation and its cultural tapestry.
It's interesting that you mentioned Jean-Luc Mélenchon, because another politician spoke this week, and it's Prime Minister François Bayrou who stated, I quote, that France was nearing a feeling of migratory submersion to what would become Zemmour, this Prime Minister.
I heard LFI, Madame Panot, all of them saying he talked like me. So,
Ça a dû vous faire plaisir, c'est ce que...
I was just going to tell you,
In the absence of power, I'm one.
the words do reach it, and I would be the last to not enjoy a semantic ideological win. And so ideological indeed. You know well that I always quote Lenin's famous phrase, make them eat the word, and you will make them swallow the thing. This is something which the left has understood very well, by the way. And they have understood it for a long time, since they constantly impose on us their words and language, dictating the language,
Submersion seems to be out.
The word submersion is taboo, of course. You've seen it in the dictionary, where it means a wave that completely replaces and dominates everything, effectively erasing all else.
Would you prefer to join a great replacement?
It's what I was going to say. It's synonymous with the great replacement. In fact, so of course you're right there. It's a big semantic victory. It's actually, one of my major points of disagreement with Marine Le Pen and the National Rally, because I fight with my words and they accept the words of the opponent. They say the great replacement is a conspiracy theory. They say Islam is compatible with the Republic. They say Islam is different from Islamism, you see, and so on and so on. I take my words, I defend my words passionately. I think I'm waging a war of words because it's a fundamentally political war.
Is it closed, this great replacement you mentioned?
But I really wanted to. I gave you all the figures. I think when 30% of a new generation is Arab Muslim, it was the balance of power then.
Do you think it's really happening or not yet?
Yes, wait. Yes. But it was about the demographic balance of power in Lebanon before the civil war. You must know there were around 60%, maybe 70% Christians.
No, not back then.
That's why I say, I told you, first of all, you see, it doesn't completely align with religions and origins. Since I told you in each camp, there are different people. There are Muslims who want to live like the French. In fact, they are often criticized for it in their community, like the French. And this, I had said at Villepinte at the very start of the presidential campaign. They are obviously our brothers, and those who want to assimilate are obviously our brothers. And on the other side, there are so-called native French, who are allies of this Islamic conquest of our country. You see, it's more subtle and complex than it seems, but...
Michel Houellebecq in his novel says the fight is lost.
But it was just a novel, so it was easy to say that. I think, despair is very easy. It's much easier than the will to fight against what makes us feel despair. Despair is incredibly easy, almost effortless. When I wrote The French Suicide 10 years ago now, I was told I was accused of being hopeless. And now I'm reproached for refusing to embrace despair. What should we do? First, we must stop everything. Stop everything. Stop illegal immigration. I see everyone talks about it, but no one does anything. We'll get back to Beirut and stop legal immigration. That's the most important. The 100,000 family reunifications, the 100,000 students, the 150,000 asylum rights. I think we need to decide on a moratorium on asylum rights. We must stop. We must stop family reunification, only take a few thousand top-tier students. You see, those are the major areas of legal immigration. No one does anything to stop it. And for illegal immigration, finally send them back. And to make countries accept it, apply pressure. We have many ways to apply pressure. We can ban Algerian dignitaries from coming to France for medical treatment. I assure you, they will feel it. We can very well stop the money that all the Russian immigrants.
Russian oligarchs.
We sized their assets. You're right, we can do this too with Algerian or African dignitaries. But first, we can already stop the money that represents astronomical sums and crucial amounts for the entire economy of these countries. The funds immigrants send back to their families, we can easily block it. Yes, we have many means of pressure. We can also block diplomatic visas, but of course it's doable.
If we try.
Of course, but it's not about resources, it's about will.
But still, I have a political question, Eric Zemmour. How do you explain that even if 70% of the French, according to polls, think there are too many immigrants in France, that parties like Reconquête, which propose to break with the current immigration policy, don't win more elections?
You know, Reconquête is very young, so we boldly entered the presidential race. And ultimately, after running a magnificent and very encouraging campaign, it's not because there's a problem with our approach, it's just the beginning.
Maybe not a priority.
I think it truly is. I really think it's the main issue and will certainly become even more so.
Marine Le Pen thinks it's power.
I know, but I don't think that's why she made it to the second round, contrary to what all the media say and contrary to what she might believe herself. So I would like...
You often criticize and yet you remain consistent.
Yes, I think there are several economic issues, and we will definitely talk about them, I sincerely hope. But I believe that, yes, when the country is devastated by, as I told you before, a strong minority, or perhaps even a majority, of Muslims, there will be no more economic activity. So then, we won't be able to discuss recovery, consumption, inflation, purchasing power, or any related topics, etc. You see, it will be misery. That's what happens in most Arab Muslim countries. So, and
There's a common refrain suggesting immigrants take jobs the French no longer want. What's your response?
Let's get back to Beirut because that's where we initially started. First, it's important to understand the numbers. I told you earlier there are 500,000 legal entries per year. This includes 320,000 visas and 180,000 asylum rights, whether accepted or refused, but they never leave. So you see, that makes a total of 500,000. Out of these 500,000 individuals entering the country, we have various categories of people arriving for different reasons. Among them, there are those who come for family reunification, totaling about 100,000. Then we have another 100,000 who arrive as students, eager to pursue their education and gain new experiences. Furthermore, there are those who come seeking asylum, as I mentioned earlier, numbering approximately 180,000. In addition, there are others who arrive for purposes related to solidarity protection, medical care, and other similar needs. Now, if we consider how many of these individuals come specifically to work, the figure stands at around 50,000. This means that only about 10% of the total are here for employment purposes. It's important to note that we're already discussing this 10%, which is a relatively small fraction of the overall legal immigration. Let's delve deeper into this. Where do these workers find employment? They primarily take up jobs in sectors such as restaurants, construction, agriculture, childcare, and elder care. These are the industries where they are most needed and where they contribute significantly. In particular, restaurants, especially those in the Paris region and other major cities, employ a substantial number of these workers. Whenever I visit restaurant kitchens, I observe that there are many French people working, except in Paris and the larger cities. Why is this the case? In Paris and other big cities, the cost of living downtown is prohibitively high, making it difficult for many to afford. Additionally, the suburbs have transformed into areas that some describe as enclaves, heavily influenced by Islamic culture and affected by issues such as drug trafficking. As a result, individuals are forced to reside far from the city center, making it challenging for them to work in restaurants where the hours are irregular and demanding. When it comes to industries like agriculture and construction, I've had numerous conversations with farmers and construction bosses. They consistently tell me that French people are not inclined to pursue these types of jobs. To address this challenge, I propose allowing employers in these sectors to hire foreign workers. However, there should be a priority given to European immigrants. If European workers are not available, we could consider issuing short-term contracts, lasting 2 to 3 months, after which the workers would return to their home countries. This approach would ensure that they do not settle here permanently. One innovative idea from a farmer suggested that workers be paid only once they return home, as an incentive to leave. In essence, there are numerous short-term solutions that can be implemented. However, looking at the long-term perspective, I firmly believe that we need to encourage young French citizens to reconsider these job opportunities. This can be achieved through comprehensive training programs, improving working conditions, and offering better pay. Additionally, addressing welfare dependence is crucial to motivate individuals to seek employment and take on jobs they might not have initially considered. By doing so, we can create a sustainable and balanced approach to employment and immigration.
Listening to you, it seems like nothing is being done. Don't you think Bruno Retailleau is putting France back on track with examples like the new circular on regularizations, tightening the criteria of the Valls circular from 2012? Isn't it the case that on the migration issue, Bruno Retailleau, leading the Ministry of the Interior, is doing more than his predecessors?
Laws. It's a very good question, and it ties back to what I was going to say exactly in Bayonne, because I was going to tell you that it's good to talk. I was going to tell you indeed.
L'heure actuelle headline here was him, Bruno Retailleau,
This week has been quite eventful, precisely. I was going to say something for Bruno because for Beirut it's important, particularly because there is this issue, but we'll talk about it a bit later. The left jumped on him for using the word submersion, but I would like to clarify that he specifically said feeling of submersion. Just to be precise, because when Jospin mentioned there was a feeling of insecurity, the right, rightly so, responded by saying no, it's not merely a feeling, it's a reality. Here, it's the same situation, it's not just a feeling of submersion, it's the actual reality of submersion. That's a side note because I think the left once again threw a smokescreen behind this expression to divert attention. Returning to the subject of Retailleau, I think Bruno Retailleau, whom I know well, is a completely honest and valiant person who holds strong convictions, noble Catholic, conservative convictions, and who is very much in line with them. Now let's judge the facts based on available information. You give me a good example. The Valls circular. What exactly is the Valls circular? You might remember that in 1981, 1988, and 1997, there were substantial waves of regularization of illegal immigrants, with between 100,000 and 130,000 individuals being regularized. When Valls came to power at the Ministry of the Interior, I think it was during Hollande's presidency, so it's around 2012, he established a circular to regularize people year after year to avoid those massive waves. Well, it's about labor immigration that you mentioned earlier. We've observed over the past decade that this circular allowed 30,000 illegal immigrants to be regularized per year. Very well. What does Bruno Retailleau do now? He says, I initially thought he would abolish it, which is what I proposed during the presidential campaign, that he would abolish this circular. Not at all. He has toughened it, as you mentioned yourself, so it means he's tightening the criteria. For instance, I'll give you one simple example. The illegal immigrant must be able to speak French. Until now, the condition was somewhat lax, and Bruno Retailleau insists, no, they must be able to express themselves properly in French. Very well. And several criteria are thus tightened. When you ask the Ministry of the Interior what the consequences will be, they themselves say, there were 30,000 regularizations per year, now there will be 20,000. Excuse me, that doesn't satisfy me. I think it's not up to the challenge. I would want 0 or 10, 20, not 20. Yes, it's very realistic.
I remember Valérie Pécresse saying it's like zero immigration, and she mentioned that many of your measures weren't realistic.
But she was talking complete nonsense. Excuse me, take for example the concept of family reunification. It's essentially an administrative stamp that allows these people to bring over their children, families, and other relatives, etc. From the moment I say, no, I don't want these people anymore, I don't want them coming legally, I can be sued. That's another discussion entirely. But we can have that discussion, and we will. But at least we can take the measure, like Trump does. Trump today takes measures that might be challenged in court. He might lose in court, but at least he takes them first thing, without hesitation, and he acts decisively. It's the same with students. They're just administrative stamps. I don't want these people anymore, except for some exceptions who meet specific criteria or conditions, which are carefully outlined.
Many watching us will think that it's not just administrative stamps, there are lives behind. Here I'm playing a bit of the advocate.
Of course, I'm speaking, but you're absolutely right. There are
families, there are people.
But you are absolutely right. There are people, families, but I consider that we are in mortal danger and that the French people face a double mortal danger.
Some families where the parents aren't. So that's the whole debate responsible, perhaps, like regarding them.
Parents did raise their kids, though. But I'm not talking about that. I get it. I get that people want to come to US to live better with our welfare, getting free health care, and seeking opportunities. I get it. It's up to us to stop this. We must no longer be a country that is invaded by others. I see us as invaded and colonized, invaded by people who come here in droves when we no longer want them, colonized because they impose their customs and way of life on us. Well, I want to stop that from continuing. If the French want to keep being invaded and colonized, that's up to them. I think they don't want it anymore. So I tell them, only Reconquête can.
No, but it's interesting because
This is an invasion and colonization.
Invaded, colonized, invasion, reconquest. These words truly set you apart from the Rassemblement. It's very clear that Marine Le Pen, even Jordan Bardella, wouldn't dare use such words.
But you're right.
But isn't it precisely that which demonizes you? Where many said during the presidential run you somewhat took on the image Jean-Marie Le Pen had at one time, while Marine Le Pen has quote-unquote normalized herself.
First, Jean-Marie Le Pen was a visionary. Today,
Everyone, today, where
I was at his funeral. Today, everyone says it. Secondly, I repeat, I don't think it's that thing, this so-called division of roles between Marine Le Pen and ME as seen by the media, that made the difference. I think the war in Ukraine changed the face of the presidential campaign to my disadvantage, altering the dynamics significantly. Thirdly, I repeat, what I want is to save France from any potential downfall. I think if we don't fight over words, we go back to the start of our conversation. What is demonization? It's the submission to the opponent's language and narrative. I think that, to ready minds for a policy that's truly one of transformative change, you must first prepare them with carefully chosen words. If we start using the opponent's words and language, we won't achieve anything substantial. Those who don't dare say the words that provoke won't take the actions that provoke, at least those actions that provoke the left. I think it's quite simple, and we see it again and again in the United States.
the example of Trump I have.
Exactly. Trump won by keeping his vocabulary consistent, facing political correctness head on, and refusing to be demonized by his opponents. And I think it's essential, look how well it goes, meaning look how legitimate he is in taking the actions he does. It doesn't mean they won't be contested or have all the needed effectiveness, but it means no one thinks it's what. Why? Wait, why? Because he does what he said. If we don't say it before, we can't do it. That's my disagreement with Marine Le Pen. I think once in power, she won't do anything she hasn't said before. So I say it before. Even if it means being called, I know it's the big word from Jordan Bardella and Marine Le Pen, outrageous. I'm not outrageous. I'm not at all outrageous. I believe in the importance of transparency and honesty in political discourse, and I feel compelled to be upfront.
Sorry to interrupt a bit, I'm also a bit out there. If I dare to quote an old media armchair psychologist, don't you think, Eric Zemmour, that politics is also about style and not just substance? We saw it. You mentioned Jean-Marie Le Pen. His remark cost him for years, sometimes sorry, in the community from North African immigration. I recently had the chance to test it just before this show. Many people see you as including people I work with, see you as the devil, see you as someone with no empathy. Doesn't that concern you at all? Sorry, you ask yourself this question, but ultimately I find that
No, but it's true.
I know you a little bit off the record, and there's sometimes a gap that can occur.
Sure.
How do you explain maybe you might be responsible for this image of...
Of course, we're responsible for our image. No, but you're right. It's a good question you're asking me. I'll answer it. I believe that...
The impression that, well, many people often say you lack empathy for individuals from immigrant backgrounds, which you yourself come from, so to speak, since you have, well, there it is.
It's more complex than that. My family was an immigrant, but it doesn't matter. I understand.
Anyway.
My family, you see, comes from that world. You're absolutely right.
The Mediterranean.
You are absolutely right. And in fact, I get along very well with people from the Mediterranean region. That's not the issue at all. You know, the problem today is that people often mix personal morals with public and state morals, which complicates things unnecessarily. In personal conduct, individual relationships come first, and you can find people of any faith, of any origin likable, and similarly, you can find people of any faith, of any origin unlikable. That's not the issue here. And obviously, I can sympathize with people, Muslims, even the unspoken ones. It's a matter of understanding and empathy beyond just cultural or religious differences.
No, but it's important to actually read it.
Evidently, but you're right. We talk nonsense, simply put. There's public morality, meaning how to express what we want for France. And here, I'm sorry, I think today Bayrou speaks of a feeling of being overwhelmed. I speak of the reality of being overwhelmed. I don't want France to become... It was the eldest daughter of the church. I don't want it to become the eldest son of the Quran. I think it's legitimate, especially since, as you mentioned, my family lived 1,000 years in an Arab-Muslim world, so I know all its flaws. And I would say many Muslims here who live there or whose families live there think the same as I do. That's what I told you earlier. I know many Kabyles who think like me, and there are taxi drivers who stop me in the street to say I'm right. You talked about people who say I'm the devil. Fine. But there are also people, I assure you, especially Kabyles or people from Chinese, Indochinese, Portuguese, Italian immigration, who tell me I'm absolutely right. So, you see, you must also try to see as a citizen, what is it? It's someone who sees beyond individual relationships, who sees the country's destiny. You know, there was a phrase from Benjamin Constant that I really like. You know, Benjamin Constant was one of those liberal intellectuals from the early 19th century who said, everything is moral with individuals, everything is physical with the masses. You understand what that means. It means that you and I can be culturally light years apart, etc., and we can get along. We can also not get along. That's individual moral relationships. And then there are the masses. When you go to any suburb today or any big city and see entire neighborhoods with only kebab shops and Muslim bookstores and halal butchers, and you see people in traditional dress and women in veils, you're no longer in France. People are shocked that I say this. Excuse me, to all French people, this is no longer France. It's an Arab-Muslim country. We have Arab-Muslim enclaves in a country that is France. When I say this, I don't insult anyone, I don't blame anyone, even though I think people should make the effort to assimilate, dress like us, and give French names to their children, but it's up to the state to enforce this. It's because I believe in the importance of cultural integration and the preservation of our national identity. It's crucial for the unity and cohesion of our society. We must not lose sight of what makes us uniquely French. The values, the traditions, the history, they are all part of who we are. We cannot allow these to be diluted by failing to address the challenges posed by the lack of assimilation. This is not just about preserving a way of life. It's about ensuring the continuity of our nation as we know it.
You mentioned about French names. I
think
you
But you know, it's a rule from 1802 that was well accepted by all immigrants until the 80s, 90s. And it was only abolished in 1993. Why today do we complain, you know, that France is divided into communities? That France is fragmented, as the excellent 4K puts it. And why is it fragmented? Because there are people who don't share the same culture and who therefore are on the same land but don't have the same culture. The name was a cultural unifier. It was to say, We are all now of the same culture. We all adopt the customs, traditions, the history of the country where we are, France. And so we call ourselves like the kings, Louis, or like the countryside folks, Jean, and so on. That's it. That's a French name. I don't want to tell people to change their name. I don't want to be cruel to them. I don't want to take away an individual freedom. I just want to bring people closer because, diversity has been praised since the 80s. We've been praised for it. Let me tell you, I read again this summer the great book by the immense historian, perhaps the greatest French historian of the 20th century, Fernand Braudel. In his last book, L'Identité de la France, he explains very well that the major cause of civil wars in France for 1,000 years is precisely excessive diversity. Geographic diversity, regional diversity, religious diversity, diversity of family models, and so on. France is the most diverse country, It's de Gaulle's famous joke. How to govern a country with 200 or 250 cheeses. Behind this joke, there are 1,000 years of civil war because people are so diverse that they clash. And all the efforts of the French state, the monarchy, the republic, the empire, have been to try to bring together these overly diverse people. Do you understand what I mean? And so this law about names, it's exactly that. It's acknowledging the diversity of the time. Regionally, between a Breton and a Provençal, they don't have much in common. And we bring them together. They have the same names, at least when they meet. You see, they are in sympathy, that's all. Incidentally, it would solve all the employment discrimination problems we might see. But, well, you see, it's not just about names. It's about creating a sense of belonging, a shared identity. It's about fostering unity in a nation that has always been a tapestry of different cultures and traditions. When people share names, they also share a sense of history and continuity. This continuity is essential for a nation like France, which has seen so many changes and challenges over the centuries. The importance of a shared cultural identity cannot be overstated. It helps to build bridges between communities and reduces the chances of conflict. It's a simple yet profound way to address the underlying issues of division and fragmentation. By having a common thread like names, people can find common ground and build a more cohesive society.
In any case, it's clear since you entered, let's say, the political game officially, the topic of free speech, whether by chance or not, has been brought back to the forefront. Where do we stand today? You who are a former journalist, we can confidently say it even if it feels like a complex issue.
You are very sure, no.
But you have an observer's role, let's say, in French politics. Where do we currently stand on that complex issue? Elon Musk bought X, which for many represents a sense of progress and innovation, though most French politicians, especially those on the left, want to leave but somehow decide to stay or eventually come back. What's truly your view on this matter, you who are a master of words and have an unparalleled insight?
There are two constants in France that seem to persist regardless of the changing political landscape and societal shifts. One, the left has a significant influence over public opinion and cultural narratives, effectively dominating the collective mindset. Two, a prevailing belief among the left is that any dissenting voices, particularly those that don't align with their ideology, should be silenced or marginalized. This is encapsulated in the famous phrase, "No freedom for the enemies of freedom," which highlights a paradox in their stance on liberty. I came across an enlightening article recently. Well, it was actually on Thursday morning in Le Figaro, which delves into how political differences can fracture friendships. The article provides a detailed account of a young woman who tells her friend, "I can't be friends with someone voting for Zemmour." This is a telling example of how political affiliations can create deep divides in personal relationships. Notably, the article primarily features scenarios where individuals on the left choose to sever ties with those they perceive as right-wing or far-right. It's interesting that the narrative rarely flips the other way around. This could be because the left often views politics with a moral or even quasi-religious fervor, akin to modern-day priests delivering sermons. Historical figures like Michelet and Barrès have drawn parallels between political leaders and priests, with Michelet famously saying, "Robespierre is a priest," and Barrès noting, "Jaurès is a priest." These figures were seen as preachers of their ideologies. In contemporary times, this preaching continues with an intent to excommunicate those who dissent or hold differing views. This pattern has been a persistent theme throughout 2 centuries of French history. Enter the ERA of social media, which I believe has had a transformative impact, similar to that of the printing press in the 15th century. Allow me to elaborate. Before the advent of the printing press, the church maintained a tight grip on biblical interpretation, as literacy was rare and texts were scarce. This monopoly allowed priests to dictate the understanding of the Bible to the masses. However, the printing press revolutionized this dynamic by making books accessible, leading to increased literacy and the rise of Protestantism, spearheaded by Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church. In a parallel development, social media has disrupted the traditional media's hold on narrative control, much like the printing press did for religious texts. This digital revolution has empowered individuals to voice their opinions freely, challenging the media's monopoly on event interpretation. The newfound freedom was revolutionary, and in response, the established media church launched a counter-revolution to regain control. They labeled dissenting views as conspiracy, fake news, or hate speech to suppress this wave of expression. The goal was to stigmatize and silence those who dared to speak out, reinforcing a singular truth. This struggle continues in Europe, with figures like Elon Musk emerging as challengers to the status quo. Musk, akin to a modern-day Luther, undermines the media church's monopoly and the orthodoxy of right think. The confrontation is palpable, as Musk, through platforms like Twitter, poses a significant challenge to established narratives. Consequently, efforts to demonize him have intensified, illustrating the lengths to which the system will go to discredit those who oppose it. The battle for control over narratives is not just a historical footnote, but an ongoing saga reflecting a deep-seated human tendency to dominate the flow of information. This dynamic is evident in various forms across different societies and eras, demonstrating the universal nature of the struggle for narrative supremacy. As technology evolves, so does the complexity of this struggle, with new platforms and voices emerging to challenge the traditional gatekeepers of information. The question remains, who will ultimately prevail in this ongoing battle for the hearts and minds of the public? Only time will tell.
They accuse him of meddling.
He is accused of interference. And this is the moment where it's extraordinary. The same people who used to scorn the flag and mock patriots now have a patriotic sensitivity and are very sensitive to foreign interference. It's quite ironic, really. The same people who praised Obama's support for Merkel and Macron now have a keen sense and find it scandalous that Elon Musk supports Nigel Farage or the Germans from the AfD. It's amusing and somewhat hypocritical. The same people who said Soros was a great man because he funded pro-migrant associations left and right now find it scandalous that this Elon Musk, notice, he doesn't even, if I may say, forbid his adversaries from speaking on Twitter. He simply wants to express himself, which is quite extraordinary and perhaps even admirable in today's climate. If I've understood correctly, I'm not a specialist, he leaves his Twitter algorithm open. Everyone knows it. Everyone can analyze it. It's a joke when you see what others have done on the opposite side. We now know because we have Zuckerberg's confession, who has changed his tune. But if you will, you've understood what he said. You've seen this incredible admission he made by saying he used his algorithm to eliminate all right-wing people and Republican parties by labeling them as conspiracy theorists and hate speech. This revelation has sparked debates and discussions across various platforms, drawing attention to the biases inherent in these technological systems. He admitted it openly, so now we all know everything about the entire totalitarian project and the tools that are involved.
There are bridges between you and since you were at Donald Trump's reinstatement, we say it again, and you want to build even more bridges between your party and perhaps Donald Trump's party, the Republicans Online.
You know, if you will allow, I think here too.
Marine Le Pen, Pardon, and Jordan Bardella have been quiet in their support.
There, you're indeed using a bit of understatement. Oh, really?
I agree.
You know well that Marine Le Pen forbade all her people from even celebrating Donald Trump's win. How do I explain it? You see, we've explained it before. That is, with someone who ran a demonization campaign and accepted the demonization and faced it, and with someone who put their entire strategy on demonization reversal, there's a notable difference. Moreover, there are even fundamental differences that aren't analyzed enough. Donald Trump's 2024 campaign is not the same as in 2016. It isn't just a populist campaign against elites like in 2016, which was quite legitimate since in globalization, the elites had abandoned their people. That's not the case today, not as much the case today. Donald Trump's campaign was anti-immigration and anti-woke. The national rally is very timid, to say the least. There, I'm also using understatement on the fight against wokeism and... You see, I must share this story because it is one of those tales that carries with it a weight of significance that cannot be overstated. It's not merely a story for the sake of storytelling, but rather a narrative that holds within it layers of meaning and depth, resonating on multiple levels. The act of sharing this story feels almost like a responsibility, a duty to ensure that its lessons and insights are not lost to the sands of time. In a world where stories are often told and retold, some fade into obscurity while others stand the test of time, becoming part of the collective consciousness. This particular story belongs to the latter category. It has a certain timeless quality and enduring relevance that makes it worth recounting again and again. It's a tale that has been passed down through generations, whispered from one person to another, each adding their own nuances and interpretations along the way. The story itself is not just about the events that unfold, but about the characters and their journeys, the choices they make, and the consequences that follow. It's about the universal themes that underpin human existence: love, loss, hope, and redemption. These are the elements that give the story its power, its ability to touch the hearts and minds of those who hear it. Moreover, this story serves as a mirror, reflecting back to us our own experiences and emotions. It prompts us to question, to reflect, and to think deeply about our own lives and the world around us. In sharing this story, we are not just telling a tale, but inviting others to join in a shared experience, to connect on a deeper level. Thus, the telling of this story is an invitation to explore, to understand, and to empathize. It's a call to open our minds and hearts, to embrace the complexities of life, and to find meaning in the midst of it all. So as I share this story, I hope that it resonates with you as it has with me, leaving an indelible mark on your soul. You see, I simply must tell you this fascinating story.
It happens in France, that's what.
And that's what's happening, of course. I have friends in big French companies. We don't take the elevator. No, it's worse than that. That's been happening for years. You're right, for years.
But he...
À être, plus de deux. Now, they're forced to hire people just because they're North African, black, women, gay, regardless of their skill. Let's say skill, it doesn't bother me at all, you understand. But here, they're hired even though they don't have...
Facing these qualities, the positive ones. But it's political fortune.
That's the point. But my dear, it's the very root of wokeism. It's the consequences you see in companies today. So we must understand what it is, and indeed, you're right, I fight against it, but why first?
Yes, pardon. Eric Zemmour. On the other hand, I tell you how to fight against the real discrimination that can exist. You don't deny that one, do you? Does it exist or not, in your view? Discrimination in hiring based on a CV when you have a first or...
Yes, I fight by wanting everyone to have a French name. The reason is simple. If you have French names, there won't be hiring discrimination, because studies show it's the name that shocks. With a foreign name, there's no discrimination. It's interesting. Studies prove this. However, with a particularly Arab or Muslim name, yes, there's some discrimination, but because people are afraid, they're afraid of Islam. They're afraid you might start asking for a prayer mat at work or days off for EID. Maybe not shaking hands with women. I'm not saying all Muslims do this, far from it, but employers are scared. That's what explains discrimination. So I believe the closer people are culturally, the less discrimination there will be. I see it. The French people are the most open in the world, the least racist. They're universalist. They're Christian. Do you get what Christian universalist means? Plus they're Cartesian, meaning they're instinctively abstract into general ideas and universalism. All men are the same. That's the deep mindset of the French. So it's the country with the least discrimination. If there is any, it's because of too many cultural differences. People need to get closer. Too much diversity. They need to adopt the same civilization, fit into the French civilization mold, meaning Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman. It can't work with another civilization, as we said earlier. This is because French civilization is deeply rooted in these traditions and values which have shaped their society for centuries. The idea is that by embracing these shared cultural foundations, people can find common ground and understanding, thus reducing potential barriers.
Sorry to mention her briefly, but Marine Le Pen was on LCI this week, and she also strongly believes in a dissolution this summer or fall. Would you have candidates Reconquête if there's a dissolution?
Okay.
In the coming months, of course.
We are committed. We run for elections. We are part of this national movement. Truly the only free party.
The Marine Maréchal episode is completely behind us now. Oh, it's behind, yes.
I said, but that's my response. We are the only free party in this movement, free from any subjection to the National Rally. Let me explain further. You mentioned Marine Le Pen's interview on LCI. It didn't escape us that at one point Darius Rochebin, the interviewer, asked her, "So, are you in favor of reducing the number of civil servants?" And spontaneously she said, which didn't surprise me because it's what she truly thinks and always has, "Oh no, that's a right-wing thing." Well, I smiled watching her because I thought of all the people allied with her who actually wanted to reduce the number of civil servants. So we know that all these people who are quite respectable and who have quite respectable ideas, since I often share them, but all these people will achieve nothing since they are allied with Marine Le Pen, and it is Marine Le Pen who will decide. So there's no point, if you have those liberal conservative ideas, in voting for these people since they are affiliated with Marine Le Pen and under her control, who thinks it's right-wing stuff. We, at Reconquête, when we support an idea, when we support reducing the number of civil servants, we can implement it because we will decide. It's not the same, you understand? That makes a radical change. It's not useless to vote for Reconquête in this case. Then, but you should also consider that it's not just about one policy. It is about having the freedom to act independently without being constrained by someone else's ideology or agenda. We can promise to deliver on what we stand for.
You're often criticized for being single issue, and this is the chance.
Let's talk about the economy, but there you are.
I'd like that because...
In the end, Eric, it amuses me because we've been together a while, and you've only discussed immigration and Islam with me. Then you say it's normal Zemmour only talks about these topics. But what do you ask me about? We can discuss football, cinema, or literature if you want. There are so many other subjects we could explore together, but anyway.
We feel you still have a preference. Sorry, Eric Zemmour prioritized speaking.
You said
that was the main topic before power.
It is truly the existential issue for France. But I remind you, if you want us to do a fantastic show on French literature, I'm your man and I'd absolutely love the matter.
I couldn't compete, but on the economy, it would indeed be interesting if today it's true that many people, including probably some who are tempted to vote for you, reduce someone to only speaking about one topic, the fight against immigration and, incidentally, Islam. On the economy, and you mentioned Marine Le Pen, who many accuse or criticize for taking a leftist turn compared to perhaps...
Pardon me for interrupting, she didn't make a turn.
You think she was already?
She always was. I've been saying this for 15 years, so I can calmly tell you.
She's for a French state?
She is
a liberal.
She is indeed a socialist. There you go, Marine Le Pen is definitely a socialist. She's a woman of the left, without a doubt. I would say her mindset is chevènementiste. There, it's not contemptible at all.
A left-wing sovereignist.
Left-wing sovereigntist, exactly. However, if you ask her yourself.
Weren't Jean-Marie Le Pen, you think,
No, Jean-Marie Le Pen. No, Jean-Marie Le Pen is a man of the right, and it's not quite the same thing. Jean-Marie Le Pen is undoubtedly a man of the right, while Madame Le Pen is a woman of the left. But Jean-Marie Le Pen said it himself. Forgive me, just look in the archives, and you'll clearly see what I mean. So basically...
How is she especially?
Socialist, that's it. Simply put, she's statist, she's socialist, and she refused to vote for a law requiring RSA recipients to work. She supports retirement at 62, a policy she strongly advocates. She has also defended retirement at 60, which would cost over 20 billion euros today. This stance reflects her commitment to social welfare and support for the working class, believing in security and comfort for individuals in their later years. She supports a state-controlled economy and consistently advocates for increasing state spending. Her confidence rises when discussing her economic policies. Her governance approach is clear, always emphasizing government involvement in economic matters.
Dimpo, it was a topic she was very knowledgeable about. She said that if there were certain, this week in particular, she mentioned regarding a possible censure of the Beirut government that there were limits that would be closely monitored concerning the tax increase.
It depends on which taxes we're discussing specifically. She proposed during the presidential campaign, and even still today, yesterday she reiterated it. Actually, on Wednesday night she mentioned it again, a tax on stock buybacks by large companies. You see, that doesn't really set her apart from the socialists and LFI. Economically speaking, she's very close to LFI. She's very close, I would say, to what was the common program of the left. There you go, she is socially statist, and I can't put it better than that. It's simple, it's clear, and once again, if you want, you can't reduce public spending without reducing the number of civil servants. You simply can't. That doesn't mean you have to fire civil servants. I remind you that you can't do that in France. They have tenure, and so it's just about hiring fewer and hiring less over time. You can do other things when she says, by the way, she's right, when she says, for example, that the AME should be eliminated as it would save money, but the AME costs $1 billion, $1.5 billion. We're far from the 150 billion deficit and the 3,000 billion debt, you see. I am for the elimination of the AME, but not for the billion. I am for it because it is a fixation point that attracts immigrants to the country, and that is a significant factor to consider.
All right, economy. What does Florence Heidel tell you? What are you in contrast? You are a true bookshop owner, free me.
I support market freedom wholeheartedly. Liberal, yes. The words are often skewed in France, but never mind. Let's say I truly support a market economy. I really do.
Independence.
The end of handouts. I'm for the fact that in France, we need to understand where we come from. We are at 48% mandatory levies, right? That means we work nearly 1 day out of 2 for the state and to pay taxes. Under General de Gaulle, I'll give you the numbers so you'll understand the comparison. We were at 33%, 48, 33, and General de Gaulle said, Jacques Chirac himself told me, he said to him, you don't exceed 33. Chirac was then Secretary of State for the budget. He was quite pressed. You don't exceed 33%, General de Gaulle, who is always portrayed as a crazy statist. That's false. The Germans are at a 42% mandatory levy, and we should at least aim to return to that figure. The average in Europe is around 40 to 42, and that's the minimum we should consider. Today, did you see Bernard Arnault's statement? You will come, of course, who says
that he's dropping Macron. It's quite a notable event, because if even he starts letting go of Macron, who he had helped build,
let me tell you,
and at least by support,
Emmanuel Macron's approach, particularly during his tenure as both a minister under François Hollande and as president, has been marked by some attempts to alleviate the tax burden. When he was minister, he demonstrated a notable virtue by slightly reducing taxes, though these efforts were not entirely sufficient for my preferences. For instance, while he reduced production taxes to some extent, it wasn't quite enough for my liking. Additionally, he made adjustments to the wealth tax, but I would have preferred a more comprehensive elimination of it. It's puzzling to me why individuals with real estate assets are still required to pay taxes while those holding stocks face a lower tax rate. Yes, stockholders still pay around 30%, but this is notably less than what others have to pay. Macron's strategy aligns with a supply-side economic policy which emphasizes encouraging production and supply rather than stimulating demand. The central issue with Macron's policies is that although he made some tax cuts, he did not correspondingly reduce government spending. This discrepancy is quite clear, and even an 8-year-old could grasp that this mismatch leads to an increased deficit. The logic is simple. If taxes are reduced without a parallel decrease in spending, the deficit inevitably grows. Furthermore, Macron did not make significant cuts to social spending, nor did he address the inefficiencies within the administrative apparatus. Our country is burdened with numerous administrative agencies that perpetually generate regulations, leading to increased costs. France is in fact the most administered country in Europe, with a sprawling public sector. To put it in perspective, our administration accounts for approximately 58% of the public sector, which is considerably higher than that of countries like Germany. This excessive administration necessitates a re-evaluation and reduction of the public sector, as well as the elimination of redundant administrative agencies that primarily serve to reassign civil servants who are generously compensated for creating regulations that incur financial costs. The remarks made by Bernard Arnault were particularly enlightening. He highlighted a significant issue, the flow of money into the United States, contrasted with its exodus from Europe. This shift is attributed to the growth observed in the United States, along with an increase in purchasing power. The concept of purchasing power is crucial as it reflects the economic health and prosperity of a nation. The dynamics of money movement and economic growth between regions underscore the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for Europe.
There is no economic patriotism, sorry, because no.
No, you're right. He doesn't talk about it. But wait, please, I'll gladly talk about it in detail. He tells us that Trump will lower the corporate tax rate to 15%, while we are currently at 25%, and also the Bayrou government followed the Barnier government because, as I remind you, tax increases have been happening since the LR returned to government. It should be noted that these people have been campaigning for tax cuts for years, and when they finally come to power, after 15 years away, the very first thing they do is raise taxes again. Well, they're planning to implement a special tax on businesses while Trump cuts taxes. Just imagine what they'll do next. You are absolutely right. We could certainly demand virtue and economic patriotism from both big and small bosses. I have done it quite a lot myself, and will always continue to do so. Now, we must understand that not everyone is naturally virtuous, unfortunately, and economic theory precisely relies on their inherent selfishness. You know the great law of Smith, which says the baker makes good bread because he wants to sell it, not because he wants it to be good, so we must cleverly play on their selfishness, and also what?
Claude Bernard Arnault thought that.
Listen, he's a huge industry leader, that's clear. I don't say I admire him because, honestly, I don't know him personally. I've never met him in any context or event. He's not in my camp, and he's never supported me. On the contrary, you see, despite this, he's a great industry leader, that's clear. And I like French people who succeed and make a name for themselves. I like French people who carry France's name proudly in the world, showcasing our culture and achievements. But I want to return to the point.
The case of Vincent Bolloré.
Of course, but Vincent Bolloré is not only a great captain of industry, but also someone who defends his opinions close to mine.
All right, it's still.
Better.
Finally, WHO runs Canal Plus with a firm grip.
But my dear, we're definitely getting to that topic. We'll discuss it very soon. Bernard Arnault says that if you raise taxes, businesses will decide to relocate elsewhere, seeking more favorable conditions, as higher taxes can be a significant burden for them.
Then we can do IT.
I told you once again, we can criticize them on moral grounds, but economically we understand them better than before. Our problem today is companies can set up wherever they want, and they're even being actively courted everywhere to settle all the big groups. And secondly, and this is where it becomes very important, their market is global, spanning across continents and reaching every corner of the world. You know, today in France we have large groups, the famous CAC 40. That's not the case, for example, with Italians who have many small businesses but not many large groups. We have more large groups than the Germans, for example, but these large groups are 50% owned by foreigners, which significantly affects their decision-making processes. But these large groups use 60% of their workforce who are foreigners, drawing talent from around the globe. And these large groups, listen to me well, make 80% of their revenue abroad in international markets far from home. That means they depend less and less on France with each passing year. That's our problem. One day, the shareholders of these companies, who will be majority and not French, will tell them to move entirely, and it will be a disaster for France, shaking its economic foundations.
I believe 45% of LVMH's taxes are paid to France.
You see, so we must thoroughly understand all this well. It's a major issue, by the way. There are many companies in recent years valued abroad, Alstom, etc. It's a disaster for France.
So we're dependent on them? No.
We're not dependent on them. We're dependent on the policies we choose. We're dependent because we have the highest social spending in the world. We're dependent because with our huge social charges, our wages, we can never raise salaries. And we have employees rightly feeling underpaid and bosses saying, if I raise you, it'll cost too much. Both are right. So we must reduce social charges, we must reduce taxes, we must...
Where do you find revenue? Because
Because the revenues
the Jersey team,
decrease.
they don't do it with a light heart, I think. Wait,
Yes, they don't do it light-heartedly, but it's a deliberate political choice. They don't want to cut spending. Spending needs to be massively reduced, including budgetary spending and state spending. As I told you before, there's a lot...
immigration, you've assessed it.
Listen, during the presidential campaign, I said, limiting social welfare benefits to French citizens would save 20 billion euros. But we must go beyond immigration. Spending cuts go far beyond that. You know, you bring me back to immigration yourself, and then you'll say, I'm not talking about other issues.
It's on an economic level.
That's right, yes. So when you look at the situation concerning subsidies for associations, 11 billion just from the state, and 29 billion when you include Social Security, along with additional subsidies from local authorities, don't you think we need to seriously consider cutting back on these politicized associations? When you see all the agencies, the various state agencies operating, tens of billions are involved, don't you think we should eliminate these agencies altogether? When you have public broadcasting that costs 4 billion for both TV and radio, we can consider privatization. When you have subsidies for wind turbines, 20 billion for what seems like nothing for energy that's just 3% of what's consumed in France, there are numerous savings to make. And I'm not even talking about social policies where savings can also be found. So you see, there are many opportunities for savings to be made. And as Marine Le Pen would say, it's a right-wing thing. So indeed, we need to adopt right-wing measures, reduce spending, and cut taxes. We must reduce taxes to force spending cuts. We need to do this together, collaboratively and efficiently.
We are nearing the conclusion of this episode to return, as you said, to the right. Do you still believe in the union of the right, ultimately, because we see Retailo is rejuvenated? And do you think LR is a party that's dead still?
Listen, Eric.
Since you criticize the RN a lot, what's your pool then? No, but your pool, your political reserve. I'm not hitting.
I really want to explain.
No, I want the politics too.
I don't criticize to criticize. I want to tell the voters of the Rassemblement National who vote for it out of habit or thinking it's the only way to win, that they should first, in my view, consider the beliefs, the ideas, the programs. Then they vote and think of who they align with most, who they are closest to, and there's always unity. But I didn't understand. It will be necessary.
Arrive at 50%, so at some point strategic alliances will need to be considered. So could it be...
I don't want to talk about tactics anymore. We've been trapped in tactical stories, and I don't want to be stuck in these empty stories any longer. What I do know is there's a presidential election, which is truly the heart of French political life.
Running 27?
We'll see how things unfold, but anyway, I'm diligently working on it. What I know is that in 2022, I didn't make it to the second round, and I called to vote for Marine Le Pen. So I clearly know where my duty lies in this political landscape. I firmly believe everyone will have the same reflex, or at least I hope so. So I think there's a healthy competition. And I'm telling you that in the camp, in the National Bloc, there's really the National Rally and US, since all the others are affiliated and submissive, as Nicolas Sarkozy pointed out, on the baggage rack of the RN and Marine Le Pen. We are a free party. We stand as competitors. We are rivals. We are opponents. But the same applies with LR, even if LR is now in the Macron camp, since it governs alongside him, which is not nothing to consider. And I, for example, when you talk about Mr. Retailo, I told you before.
Did it shock you that he accepted to, no?
No, nothing shocks me, but I will judge based on facts. I'll judge on numbers. I'll judge on how many legal entries. Are we still going to have 500,000? How many undocumented sent back? How many in jail? How many expelled? See, I judge how many drug traffickers expelled and so on and so on. I judge on numbers. Well, so there. For me, the union happens as in the second round people choose. After that, there's no need to complicate things. especially since Mrs. Le Pen doesn't want this union of the right anyway. So why bother? Why get worked up? We defend our ideas. I defend my ideas. You see, they're different. Sometimes we agree with the National Rally, with Marine Le Pen. I agree to stop immigration, for example.
National preference.
For national preference in housing, you see, it's a very good example. National preference in housing, I saw there was a discussion in the National Assembly. Well, you see, I completely agree with the National Rally and disagree with LR on reserving social housing for the French. However, I disagree with the National Rally, which does not want to abolish the SRU law that requires 25% social housing per municipality, because I want to abolish the SRU law. You see, points of agreement, points of disagreement, I rely on ideas, convictions, and facts. I simply ask voters to do the same. That's all. And I think, since we're reaching the end of this show, I think we talked about Trump earlier. I think there's a big movement in all Western countries, whether in the United States, in Europe, in France, in Germany. We see it in the recent elections in England, in Italy, etc., for this defense by European peoples of their identity, their customs, their freedom, whether it's their freedom of expression or their economic freedom, this whole big movement that is sweeping and blowing through all of Europe, and of which Reconquête is the French expression. It's important to understand that this movement is not just political, but also cultural and societal, impacting various layers of society. So that's why I fight, that's why I continue, that's why I don't despair. I think everything is still possible. We just need to equip ourselves with the means, with the tools necessary to navigate these changes effectively.
And you, as an observer of political life, I was saying for decades in France, I think you are. Yes, you are nonetheless.
Okay.
At the forefront of politics, but do you think everything is still possible by 2027? There's a lot of ongoing talk about the impending verdict against Marine Le Pen. Do you think the political deck can be completely reshuffled?
You know, the favorites for 30 years now, for 30 years, the one who is favored 2 or 3 years before the presidential never wins. We had Balladur, we had Jospin, we had Juppé. But I wanted to say, and I've already said it, that it would be scandalous if Marine Le Pen were declared ineligible. It's not up to judges to decide who the French should vote for. I said it after the prosecutor's indictment, and I say it again, and I will say it again. You know, I wrote 25 years ago about the cope by judges, so I'm not the one who will say today that judges should decide in place of the people. There have already been too many, you know, the presidential. There's a kind of curse over the past few rounds of the presidential. They are. It's as if the election is rigged every time. It was skewed by the removal under the circumstances of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was the big favorite in 2011. It was skewed in 2017 by the removal by judges of François Fillon, who was really destabilized by this justice operation. There is...
Sarkozy's fault, by the way.
It was skewed. Hold on. It was skewed in 2022 by Putin's intervention in Ukraine. I wouldn't want it to be skewed again by this conviction of Marine Le Pen.
Without forgetting that on the international stage, there's this ongoing Palestinian conflict imported with LFI for many, and it could have...
On another topic I answered earlier.
Of course. Last thing, and it's the final question, many say that Emmanuel Macron's last move might be to give Jordan Bardella the chance to reach Matignon after this new dissolution, then show that after a year or a year and a half, it doesn't work. Do you believe it?
It was clearly his strategy in 2024 to bypass Gabriel Attal, who had his own coalition against the National Rally. I wait patiently and fight tenaciously for my ideas and beliefs, because that's what truly matters most to me. The rest, including all political games and maneuvers, don't interest me anymore. I've realized that staying true to my principles is more important than getting entangled in endless political drama. My focus now is on what I can genuinely achieve without compromising my core values and integrity.
Well, thank you very much. Anyway, final word. You leave me speechless. No one can say otherwise. Thank you, Eric Zemmour, for agreeing to be our guest this week. We'll meet again next week for a new episode of Les Incorrectibles. Until then, I keep saying it, stay incorrectible. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.